So yeah, for those of you who haven't, you probably know vaguely about the plot, but basically what happens is, you have Hamlet. Hamlet's dad was the king of Denmark. Hamlet also has this uncle named Claudius. Hamlet's mom's named Gertrude. What happens is that Hamlet's dad, the king of Denmark, dies, and his uncle Claudius marries his mother, and so his uncle becomes the king of Denmark. And that's kind of the premise of the play when it begins. And what happens is that Hamlet sees the ghost of his father, and the ghost of his father says, "Oh, your uncle Claudius killed me. You need to go avenge my death." So essentially, that most of the play is Hamlet trying to and debating about avenging his father's death and killing Claudius. There's a lot of other crap, like, Ophelia. And if you've seen Sassy Gay Friend, there's one about Ophelia. Yeah, it's not really relevant to my talk, but that's the core of the play. And so most of the play is basically Hamlet struggling over exacting his revenge on Claudius. Like, oh, should I kill him? Should I not? What should I do? This is crazy. And I'm freaking out. Being all like, oh, should I live or should I die, etc. You guys know to be or not to be. So that's like, should I live or should I die, or should I act or should I not act? So there's a lot of the whole, what should I do? A lot of indecisiveness. So at the end of the play, spoiler, but I guess it's kind of necessary, Hamlet does eventually succeed in killing Claudius, but only he dies himself, as do the majority of the other characters in the play, in the typical manner of a Shakespearean tragedy. So basically, the play Hamlet is very true to its name, in that it's pretty much all about Hamlet. People even argue that the other characters are only there to represent facets of Hamlet's personality. Hamlet has more lines in a single play than any other character in Shakespeare. Like, there are certain characters that are in various plays that have more lines total, but in one play he has the most lines. Essentially, most of the play is Hamlet coming out to the audience and being like, this is how I feel right now, I'm really confused, I don't know what I should do, etc. So you really get into his mind, like, you learn his psychology. And so, Hamlet is Shakespeare's most famous play, and it's studied really extensively, and not without reason. So because most of the play is divulging Hamlet divulging his thoughts, he's a really, really well-formed character. I would even argue, if not the most developed character in English literature, then definitely in the top 5. I mean, he's really, to the audience and to the reader, he's really real. And so this has given rise to a lot of various interpretations of Hamlet. So, like, there's the famous, like, is he crazy, is he not crazy? And a lot of people have various sides on the issue and make really convincing arguments. And something that you don't necessarily realize about Shakespeare is that these may both be valid interpretations. Because Shakespeare was writing for the actors who would then perform the plays. So the actors, there would be that intermediary, the actor who would interpret the character. So various interpretations of any given Shakespeare character or play may be equally valid. And so what I'm going to be talking about primarily is my interpretation of Hamlet's character, and then talking about how it relates to modern society. It's a little weird, a little different than a lot of the stereotypical interpretations. But I think that because Shakespeare was trying to guide people, it's an equally valid interpretation. So when I read Hamlet, what I see that Hamlet has masculine characteristics and feminine characteristics, as the play defines masculine and feminine, not necessarily inherently masculine or feminine. And this causes a lot of an internal conflict. Like, a lot of the play is Hamlet, berating himself, getting mad at himself, and being unable to act, etc. And so that causes a lot of conflict in him. And I think that in this, Shakespeare's kind of creating a metaphor for society and gender differences, etc. And so in this PubSpeak, I'm going to first do just because I'm a huge Shakespeare nerd, a brief discussion of women in Shakespeare and how Shakespeare feels about women, and then go more into Hamlet's own femininity and his internal conflict, give a bit of evidence, and then largely talk about what Shakespeare means by this and what he's trying to convey, and then I'm going to discuss how that's relevant to modern society, so in terms of gender norms and what gender is. Okay, so one reason that I particularly love Shakespeare is that he's one of the stereotypical old white guy authors that you read in English class, forms the basis of your literary education, and yet he writes a ton of really awesome female characters, which is just not very par for the course. So the few examples are, for example, if you guys have read As You Like It, there's a character Rosalind, basically orchestrates the entire play, does everything. A lot of the characters spend a lot of time in drag, essentially because she's off in the forest and whatever, she dresses in drag, mostly for security. But she solves the problems of the play by revealing her gender, which I think is really significant. So she solves the play by asserting her femininity and becoming female, essentially by revealing that she is female. Again, you have Portia from Merchant of Venice, again, orchestrates everything that's going on in the play, figures everything out, way smarter than every male character. There's Beatrice from Much Ado About Nothing. She does a lot of verbal sparring with this guy Benedict, and she runs intellectual circles around him. It's very amusing. And then you also have strong women in the tragedies, like, for example, Lady Macbeth, who basically does everything, even though she has some negative associations. And Cleopatra from Antony and Cleopatra, again, she has a lot of control over men, even though it's largely from a sexual standpoint, but arguably the negative tint that these women's power have is because tragedies are largely more negative things. So Hamlet, just looking at it, kind of seems like an exception to the strong female characters that Shakespeare has. I mean, I think it's pretty difficult to argue that Ophelia is strong. As a character, she seems kind of be defined by her fragility, as well as almost even her vapidity and comparison to Hamlet. And you also have Gertrude. Some people argue that Gertrude, had a lot of say in it, had to do with Claudius killing Hamlet's dad. But I mean, it's also equally valid to say that, Gertrude is just completely manipulated by Claudius and has no power. And so the feminism of Hamlet manifests itself in a very different way, through Hamlet himself. And so Hamlet has these characteristics, primarily his grief over his father that he expresses a lot, and his indecisiveness. And these are traits that the play defines as feminine. These are not necessarily feminine traits objectively in society as a whole, but the characters of the play think that these are feminine traits. So for example, Claudius says near the beginning of the play, during the, I don't know if you guys know, but it's relative to him, it's your father and father died, and that father lost his, etc., so why are you pissed, upset about your father dying? And he says that Hamlet's grief is, and I quote, unmanly. So he actually uses the word unmanly to describe it. Similarly, Laertes, who's another character, is really sad. He's Ophelia's brother. Ophelia dies. He feels really sad. He's like, I have to get rid of this woman, woman of grief inside myself, and get rid of it, and once I get rid of my grief, there'll be no woman left in me. And then in terms of indecisiveness, the ghost of Hamlet's father implies that Hamlet would be womanly if he weren't to be moved to kill Claudius by what the ghost says. So these traits, even if they're not inherently feminine, the play really defines them as feminine. And so likely because of what these characters say, and this is important, Hamlet starts to see himself and see these traits as feminine, which kind of relates to, what we see as feminine in society, how that comes from not necessarily what is actually, feminine or masculine, but what society says. So at one point he refers to his soul as a mistress. He has that famous frailty that Amos Fool in the quote, which, he's pretty in terms of being frail and indecisive, and he's very indecisive. That definitely relates to him. He calls himself a whore at one point, and actually, when he berates himself, because he does that a lot, he gets really mad at himself, and so that's where he says to himself that he, prompted to revenge by heaven and hell, must like a whore unpack my heart with words and fall a cursing like a very drab scullion. So all those words that he uses are feminine and very negative. So he's basically getting really pissed at himself for this perceived feminine trait of being indecisive and not necessarily excited to revenge like he feels like he should be. And so basically throughout the play, Hamlet has tons and tons and tons of internal conflict, and I think a lot of it seems to be caused by this perceived femininity. So what is Shakespeare saying by doing this? What is the point of making Hamlet feminine? Or having feminine characteristics as a play makes it feminine? Well, it kind of shows, first of all, that Shakespeare is a pretty progressive guy, and that he's ascribing feminine characteristics to a male character. So Shakespeare seems to think that gender is not necessarily a strict dichotomy, that women aren't all, this and that, stereotypically feminine, and men are not all stereotypically masculine, which is, rather progressive for the era. But moreover, what's even more significant is that, personally, I think that in Hamlet, Shakespeare is kind of representing the world as a whole. So you have the masculine characteristics, which are, the masculine portion of the world, and the feminine characteristics, the feminine portion of the world. And there's a lot of, the masculine side of him trying to beat the feminine side down. And so that causes a lot of conflict within Hamlet, a lot of stuff. He gets really mad about, really emotionally unstable because of that. And so, in this, I think that Shakespeare is arguing that this kind of, male dominance, pushing down the feminine is really ruinous to society. It causes so much conflict within Hamlet, and it causes him so much trouble. And I think what Shakespeare is saying there is that it as similarly causes society a lot of trouble. Okay, so essentially, it's interesting that Shakespeare is arguing that sexism is bad, which is not necessarily unusual for him, but he also seems to be addressing how bad gender norms are, which is what I'm going to talk about in the next part of our presentation, how this aspect of Hamlet relates to modern society. Okay, so most people have heard the phrase gender norms. I'm going to go with a lot of other people and do the Wikipedia definition of what I'm defining. So, or for gender role, gender norm is very similar. So the gender role is the set of social and behavioral norms that are considered to be socially appropriate for individuals of a specific sex in the context of a specific culture. And it's interesting that they note specific culture, because the definition then proceeds into that these gender norms or gender roles differ widely between cultures and over time. So I think that's a really important point that the Wikipedia definition is bringing up here, that gender norms aren't necessarily effective. So these gender norms or gender roles are everywhere. For example, pink is a girl color. You have a baby girl, paint the room pink, get a pink balloon, dress your girl in pink clothes. There's actually, when I was doing research for this, I found online, it was very interesting. This artist or photographer had done this thing where she took various young children and had them, the girls put out all their pink stuff, and there was an absurd amount of pink. The girls put out all their blue stuff, photographed them amongst them. And it was really interesting how ingrained that color dichotomy is in our society, especially because of what we'll get into later. And there are specific toys that are for boys and for girls, girls can play with dolls, boys can play with trucks, or similar things. Different activities that are appropriate, in terms of sports especially. And these all start from a very, very young age. I mean, kids are really, especially at a young age, are kind of expected to be a stereotypical girl or stereotypical boy. And so you could argue that these gender norms are just because of biological differences, that, men have more testosterone, and, back when the hunter-gatherers, they had to go kill all the animals, so that's why they like, powerful things like trucks. But this isn't necessarily true. In the pink versus blue example that I mentioned, surprisingly enough, pink and blue were not 60 or 70 years ago, were not actually girl and boy colors like that. Before World War II, the colors were switched. Pink was a boy's color and blue was a girl's color. And there are various things that I read trying to explain why this switch happened, possibly because of overcompensation, trying to get away from the color norm, or also because of what the army wore. I've heard various things, but essentially, if you look at documents, you can see that pink used to be a boy's color and blue used to be a girl's color, which really reveals how incredibly arbitrary that is. I mean, that kind of blew my mind when I first read it. And also, interestingly, in a similar vein, in Russia, healthcare is seen as a very female profession, so the majority of Russian doctors are actually female, whereas in the United States, the majority of doctors are male. So I mean, that kind of relates to these things, they have to be arbitrary. We can just kind of switch them around like this between cultures and between time. But the thing is, and so it's kind of interesting that they're so prevalent throughout society. In a personal example I have of how prevalent and how almost unquestioned these gender norms are, is that for health class in school, I had to take this thing called the implicit association test that kind of tested how easily you associate certain words. So I mean, there was a race thing, you associate white and more easily with positive words, and black more easily with negative words. And so there was also one that tested how easily you associate men with science and women with humanities, and testing if you do that much more easily. And when I took that, I was I'm really interested in science as well as humanities. So I was kind of surprised that I got, that I strongly associated men with science and women with humanities, and it said, the vast majority of other people get a similar result. I mean, that's pretty arbitrary. And, you of course, there are plenty of female scientific researchers and doctors. I mean, climbing numbers used to be nearly none. But, this is really, really, really prevalent, and possibly almost subconscious as well, which is interesting. And so, there are differences between men and women, biologically and psychologically. But the thing is that gender norms go a lot farther when they first of all establish arbitrary things as a male or female, and second of all dictate that, this thing has to be male, this thing has to be female, when not everyone necessarily aligns with the stereotypical, gender things. Not every woman wants to raise a family. Even if more women might be inclined to stay home to raise children, not every single woman wants to do that. And gender norms kind of say that every single woman is going to do that. And so there are various negative consequences, very obviously, of gender norms. Gender norms, first of all, perpetrate sexism. So there are a lot of norms and rules that a woman should be docile and sweet and spend lots of time on her physical appearance, while looking toward these ridiculous notions of what female beauty should be that are in fact very unhealthy and unrealistic. And this is also the norm that women are more suited to housework or childbearing than professional life, which while it might be personally true for some people, it creates a lot of discrimination in the job market against women. And just as a side note, there's nothing wrong with following gender norms if that's how you personally feel, but the issue is just when people start following them because that's what society dictates. And so the thing with gender norms is that they can really be harmful to those who don't necessarily coincide with them, such as Hamlet, who doesn't coincide with the gender norms, arbitrary gender norms of his society that, grief is a feminine thing and indecisiveness is a feminine thing. And that really harms Hamlet, feeling like he has to fit those norms and almost berating himself for not fitting them. Okay, so, what would Shakespeare say about this? Because I'm kind of bringing back to what I said before. So obviously, I mean, I think Shakespeare still now would see these gender norms as incredibly harmful because he expresses them as so harmful in Hamlet. We would have to say that we have today as harmful as well. I mean, it's kind of funny that obviously they had to have similar gender norms 500 years ago, and they're still so prevalent in society today. Or not 500, 400 years ago. I can't say. Anyway. And so, you know, and you have things in society like, you know, a man or a boy who prefers stereotypically feminine things, like a boy who would like to play with dolls, would generally be, you know, belittled and ostracized. And likely for the same reasons that Hamlet berates himself and his femininity, that women are perceived as inferior. So I think, so even now today you get a whole like, oh, a man can behave in a feminine manner because, you know, women are weak. I mean, people don't really say that, it's not stated outright, but I mean, I think if you think about it, it is kind of an undercurrent of a lot of the intense gender roles that exist today. So I mean, Shakespeare realized how terrible this was 400 years ago, so it's kind of like, you know, why can't we move on? And arguably there is a bit of hope for the future in terms of getting away from gender norms. There's an instance of a kid, I don't know if you might not have heard about it, but it was kind of in the media, a kid named Storm, and their kid's parents will refuse to expose what the gender is. And while that may be a little extreme, I think it kind of symbolically shows like what does gender matter. You know, how does that have to dictate how a child lives? And so, and also you have women who are gradually entering into male-dominated fields, which kind of relates to more norms. For example, women are now half of medical school graduates, and they were a quarter of medical school graduates 30 years ago. So, but however, we still have ridiculous norms that because like pink is still very distinctly a female color, and no one really questions that, even though it was a male color 70 years ago. So, and you know, gender norms existed 400 years ago; they exist today. Maybe we'll never rid ourselves of them, but I think at least if we're going to be conscious, we should be conscious of it as Shakespeare is.
I have two questions. The first is, you talked about how the gender norms from like 400 years ago are still prevalent today. So I just wanted to know if you perhaps knew like when the ones that exist now like started. The second is like, would you categorize names as possibly also being like adhering to the gender norm? Because people say like there are guy names and girl names.
Okay, so the first one was about when the norms that exist today start.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess I can't know specifically what sort of like gender norms were around 400 years ago, for example. Just that I mean, they definitely existed. I mean, there were a lot of things like, you know, what job positions a woman can have, or that a woman should stay, you know, is more suited to being at home, which obviously, years and years ago, that was the only thing a woman could do would be, you know, raise a family. So you do have things, and you know, you could argue, okay, that's biological, but at the same time, that shouldn't be a specific rule that women have to obey, like, because that just kind of institutionalizes it. So, you know, and gender norms have been around for a really long time, but then again, so there are things that have been around for forever, and then there are other things like color that have really kind of morphed over time, I think. And then in terms of names, I mean, I would say that that's a reasonable assessment. I mean, you know, I'm probably not necessarily, and not even just because I feel it's wrong, but because it would be really hard for a kid. Like, I'm not going to go name my female children guy names just because I feel like that would be really hard for the child. But then again, at the same time, I do feel that it shouldn't be hard for the child. Ryan?
With your interpretation of Hamlet, it seems that it's not that women just suffer from gender norms, but that he suffers from gender norms because he feels grief, he feels indecisive, and he seems to think that that is somehow wrong or bad. And are you saying that, or at least you were saying, and possibly Shakespeare is saying, that it's not just women who suffer from gender norms, but also men? And my second question is, how would you consider Juliet as in the assessment of being a strong female character?
Well, in terms of, I mean, yeah, I think that's definitely accurate that sexism hurts everyone, especially because of that kind of, you know, if a guy doesn't necessarily totally coincide with what a man has to be. And, you know, for example, if a little kid prefers to play with Barbie dolls, or, you know, if an older guy, you know, prefers more feminine things, that actually, I mean, there is definitely a lot of a negative association, not necessarily because it's just something gender normal, but because of sexism. And, in terms of Juliet, actually, I mean, you think of Juliet, Romeo and Juliet, these kind of like teenagers, whimsical or whatever, but I mean, if you compare Romeo and Juliet to each other, Juliet is a much more powerful character. It's actually rather, I don't know if like I remember when I examined it in 9th grade, we read it freshman year, we talked about how she utilizes like double talk to, kind of manipulate her parents or avoid lying to them while getting away with things. But she really, exhibits a lot more intelligence and more forethought than her counterpart Romeo. So I would definitely say that comparing those two characters to each other, Julian is a positive, more positive.
Would you argue that Shakespeare was actively trying to problematize gender norms, or would you argue that he was trying to write lifelike female characters?
In terms of like Rosalind, for example, or those characters, like strong female characters in Shakespeare. I don't know if he necessarily had political motives, but I think that he definitely had a much more positive perception of women and what women are able to do than the majority of people did at the time. I actually, I write notes Shakespeare, talk about Shakespeare all the time. I'm really into Shakespeare. So for my long-term final paper for AP World History and sophomore year, I actually wrote about how Queen Elizabeth being in power influenced Shakespeare to write more powerful women. So I don't know if he was necessarily had social motives, but I think it still definitely represents that he had a much more positive view of the feminine and what the feminine could accomplish than most people did at this time.
I get that you're saying that, are you saying that Shakespeare was actively progressive in his views about women?
Yes, compared to his time, I think he's definitely progressive.
I would say it's curious, especially that the treatment of Catalina in Taming the Shrew. That just seems particularly
The Taming of the Shrew is definitely a play that doesn't necessarily coincide. It's a hard problem. I mean, because there are certain plays in like As You Like It, Shakespeare is definitely showed a positive perception of women. The Taming of the Shrew is a tougher issue. I believe it was an earlier play, but also, even though it may have a negative message about women, I mean, a lot of people who perform it nowadays concentrate more on the fact that what occurs at the end, and I believe something in the language, they're more, even though you have the weird scene with her kissing his feet, with the language that occurs, they seem to be that they've found a common ground, and maybe even a much more common level based on love. So, the Taming of the Shrew is a difficult issue in terms of feminism with Shakespeare, but it definitely has been resolved by the performance.
You talked about like the arbitrary nature of our assigning colors to certain genders, right? There was a study done where they painted a room pink, or scientists painted an entire room pink and subjected men and women to they had them go into the room and measure their responses to spending hours and hours in this pink room. And what they found was that on average, men had a huge response of all of a sudden getting very, very calm in this pink room. Doesn't the fact that there are physiological responses tied to being exposed to certain colors just evidence that it's not just an arbitrary thing?
Wait, did women not have response?
Women had no response.
Okay. Well, I think that whatever difference is there, I can't necessarily explain it, but I think it had to arise because of society. Because simply, whatever the response, the fact remains that the colors used to be completely different, and that was accepted for at least 50 years. And now, 50 years from now, then the colors are completely flipped. And I think no matter what the response is of the genders to the colors, that just kind of proves that there is definitely an elementary arbitrariness.
To play a bit of devil's advocate, how would you respond to the statement that gender norms are necessary for women to establish a shared, collective identity?
Well, I think that implying, of course you have the fact there are differences between men and women, but women establishing a shared collective identity, I think that's just emphasizing a kind of men and women as opposed to people as a whole. And I don't think, I don't think that, even though, and biologically, whatever, women may be more easily able to associate with women, I don't think you necessarily have to say that women need a collective identity in that sense, because it very much distinguishes, creates that huge dichotomy and enforces the fact that, men, in their society, men have to be specific roles, women have to have a specific role. Ryan?
You talk about the dangers of gender norms and how it sorts people into groups that they are not necessarily would choose to associate once they have come of age and can think for themselves. I'm wondering, is the solution, would you say, is just across the board whenever it comes to sorting people into groups, just judging people as individuals and holding them up to individual standards?
Oh, I completely think that people should be judged religion. I mean, I think that's so prevalent in our society. And from a psychological perspective, we categorize people. But I definitely would say that it would be much better if people were to be judged as individuals rather as their gender or their race.
So then how do we deal with adjectives, right? People are naturally like not going to be individuals. They're going to exist in groups. And they're going to come up with names or descriptors for the groups that they're in, which is going to like in turn create sort of expectations for that adjective or that name of that group. So like how do we allow people to socialize and form groups without having those groups like start forming connotations or norms that end up being harmful?
Well, I think the difference is that if you had, for example, here at TASP, like nerdy intellectual people more associated with nerdy intellectual people. I would say that's a lot more positive than distinguishing, women have to do this and men have to do this because it's more gender from how he or she is rather than rather than somebody else. I feel is much more arbitrary. And I think the main issue that I have with gender norms is that a lot of them have this not only this arbitrariness but this specific pressure. I mean, because I think of the way our brains work, it's really hard to conceive of a world in which people are not judged for arbitrary qualities or awful, arguably arbitrary qualities. And because we have that propensity to sort people and whatever, at the same time, I think that we definitely need to address the problem at hand, which is that gender roles exist, are very arguably negative and destructive to people, just on a psychological level, destructive to society.